This is Anthony Pascal.
And this is Laurie Elster, and this is the All Access Star Trek podcast. Today we are finally going to be able to talk about Star Trek Prodigy Season 2. We're going to review five episodes of Season 2. We will get there. But first, we've got news, starting with Paramount confusing everybody. The Skydance deal had gone away, we thought, and apparently now it's back on the table, has a bigger payout for Sherry Redstone, sort of helps her from being sued, apparently, or lawsuits. And I don't know, you explain the rest, because I don't know what the hell's going on.
Apparently, after she put the kibosh a month ago on the last deal, David Ellison went back to her a week later. They started talking and kept it quiet. They added more sweeteners. The issues were that the final deal that she turned down had cut the amount of money that she would get to be bought out herself personally. And she was worried about shareholder lawsuits. And apparently there's things in this new deal that will protect her from that, apparently. One of which is this provision. This, by the way, is not a done deal yet. This weekend, apparently the board is looking at it. Something would potentially be announced next week ahead of this billionaire meeting in when billionaires get together and decide how the world runs. Sherry Redstone's going to one of these things next week, and apparently she wants to get this done before she does that. If it gets approved, there'd be a 45-day period when others can make bids. So, we don't know. Someone else could come in. Barry Dillers is supposedly kicking the tires. People may remember him from running Paramount back in the 70s. The Star Trek The Motion Picture days, Star Trek Phase 2 days, he was around. And he tried to take over all of Paramount, but was beat out by the Redstones. So he's back. But it looks like the Ellison deal is going to happen. But who knows? We never know.
We've already had a lot of ups and downs and twists and turns.
But this, because she was always the problem. And it sounds like she's agreed to this. She and her family have agreed to a new deal. And so I don't see why the board wouldn't agree to it. Then it would be regulators and stuff like that, but I don't see that being a problem. But still, there's things happening at Paramount in the meantime. They're getting really serious about this joint venture thing. Apparently, it may not be Mount Cock. It may be Max Paramax. Apparently, the latest talks have been with Warner Brothers Discovery. They really want to join up with someone. They
need to.
Yeah. And we don't know what that would do to Star Trek. Would they be a junior partner? Would they just basically hand everything off and walk away? Who knows? This dust hasn't settled, but it's a little better than it was a few weeks ago, I think, for Paramount.
Yeah. There was definitely a bleaker time.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, we'll keep track of Tony will keep writing about that and keep track of it. So
as much
people,
as we can.
People need you to. You have a good insight and a good way of describing it.
We got a little movie blip from Chris Pine
that goes beyond the usual blip of, I don't know, I haven't seen a script. He actually was concretely talking about how if they did come back to do another movie, him and his gang, who he loves and would love to work with again, that the fact that they're older, especially that he's older, would have to be part of the story. It would have to affect it in some way, which is true. He was 29 when the first Kelvin movie came out. He's 43 now. Looking sharp, I'd like to add. Looking mighty good.
He did shave his beard off a couple weeks ago. Yeah, he looks good. But I think the question is, from a story perspective. So let's just say the movie happens and it comes out 3 years from now. Then that'll be 11 years since Beyond.
Yeah, it can't pick up where Beyond left off.
Right. It just doesn't make sense. That would be longer than the time period between, the series finale of Star Trek and Star Trek The Motion Picture.
And it's enough for more missions. It's more 5-year missions, but they would have to change the story. And look, that's territory we're familiar with. All those original series movies were about that to a great degree.
You could start the movie where none of the characters are together.
Right. And you bring them all, you find out what they've been doing, and they have to get back together for whatever mission. I think you might get a more sophisticated story.
I hope they address this instead of just say, because they could just say it's 1 year later, and just ignore the fact that everyone looks older.
Looks really different.
But I hope they don't. If this movie ever happens, I mean, the head of the studio brought it up, the shareholder meeting. I mean, there's, they've said things before, but he didn't have to. That was just a couple weeks ago. So there's, but again, this is not going to be the next movie. The next movie is this origin movie.
Right.
They only hired a new writer, much to the chagrin of Chris Pine, for the Star Trek 4 project in March, whereas they have a script, they have a director, they have multiple producers. I think casting and stuff is going to start happening by the end of this year for the origin movie.
Right, whatever that is.
Whatever that is. But they're going to have to, get going with the logistics of that. Certainly, if they want to get it out by 2026.
Right. I mean, look, the tricky part with the Kelvin crew is those movies, the 3 movies, which have whatever you think of them, like they're very much about their stories and their plots, whereas a lot the TOS movies were really about character in a very strong way. And so to me, this is an opportunity. Like, I like when Star Trek is about character and it's got all the sci-fi stuff going on, but these are interesting characters and these are different versions of our characters as we knew from the first movie. So I'm sort of interested in that. I mean, it doesn't hurt that I have the hots for Chris Pine, the older version. Did not have the hots for young Chris Pine, do have the hots for older Chris Pine.
I see. So the more gray he gets, the hotter he gets. Is that what you're saying? I don't
know. Kirk didn't, as Kirk, he never did it for me. As in Wonder Woman, he really did. And then now I see him. He's been doing all these podcasts. He was on Mark Maron and he was on Dex Shepard, and he's so interesting and weird and fun. So now I have a big crush on him. So bring him back.
And the recent season of The Boys has shown how Carl Urban is doing great work on that show. Amazing work.
He's been great on that from the get-go. Like, just amazing.
Yeah, because he's got this kind of complicated storyline this season. And then Simon Pegg guest starred this season, and he did some of his best acting I've ever seen him do.
Yeah, he's amazing.
They're seasoned. They're acting veterans.
Yeah, they're all really good. Everybody's really good. Everybody's been working. So I just think, to me, that's much more interesting than coming up with some action story.
There'll be action. There'll be explosions. There'll be spaceships. But,
sure.
Hopefully.
I am pro spaceship. For the record.
Yeah.
So I just like good dialogue and character stuff mixed in with all of it. And speaking of movies, they're finally all coming back to Paramount Plus.
They are back.
Yeah, they've arrived. It is July. They are there.
They were all on Max since January 1st. They're all back. So now all 13 Star Trek movies, all the TV shows, everything but Prodigy, which we'll talk about more later, is on Paramount Plus. So for who knows how long. And of course, if Paramax happens, then, I guess, it really won't matter because it'll all be there.
Paramax sounds like a brand of condoms.
I mean, I think they should do a deal with Comcast as well. They should go for Mount Cock Max, which just
sounds like some really bad porno movie. Like a high concept, bad idea of a movie. Anyway, we had a little bit of Strange New Worlds news because there was an interview with Celia Rose Gooding, who was talking about how Uhura's role is sort of changing and growing and expanding in season 3, which they've already filmed. So she basically was saying, like, Uhura at the beginning of the show was not even sure if she wanted to be there, and now she's taking more ownership and getting more confidence, and says Mariner was a big part of that.
Yeah, that's interesting. And she said she's getting closer to the Nichelle Nichols Uhura. I wonder when they're going to promote her to lieutenant. She was, she started as a cadet, then they made her an ensign in season 2. I think they should wait.
I was going to say, give her at least another season as an ensign. So she was talking about how Uhura on the original series, even though she was underdeveloped, that she was like more joyful, that she sort of flirts with life. And that's what Mariner was telling her. Like Mariner's description of Uhura doesn't match the Uhura that we have on Strange New Worlds. So it's an interesting choice, and I like that. Uhura on the original series was confident. She was very confident.
Very. But that's the whole point of this show is to show for the legacy characters how they grow into what we know. So I like where they started Uhura as this kind of almost reluctant ensign.
Yeah, she can get there. So, and she always, I feel like one thing that Uhura and Chapel on the original series both did, even when they were in scenes and they didn't have lines, they were given looks. They were serving looks, as they say. You could tell they were observing and they were looking and they were reacting. I'll look forward to some of that.
We have a little Lower Decks update. We don't know when season 5 is coming, the 5th and final season. But Mike McMahan himself, he did talk a little bit about season 5, and this could be his own personal spin, but he doesn't see the 5th and final season as the end of Lower Decks, and he thinks that there could be spin-offs, and he feels like he's setting up what he called backdoor pilots by the end. So, I don't think it's going to be the last we see of these characters.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think there are enough ways to do something, whether it is, we've talked about a streaming movie or another show, or if they do some kind of short something again, who knows? There are options and opportunities. And he mentioned that there's some cool stuff, he said, coming up with Tendi and with T'Lyn, and said some pretty cool legacy actors. And he was careful to point out it's not like cameos, like they bring them in for a reason and do something with them.
Yeah, I mean, obviously not Tom Paris, but the Locarno character was pivotal for the last season.
Mm-hmm.
So wasn't just like, because they've done silly things like where Q pops in for a joke. Yeah. But no, I prefer it when they make it part of the plot, as it were.
Mm-hmm.
But it's, because Mike has got a lot going on. He's got another TV show going now. So he's got 2 other TV shows going. And so but he doesn't want to let go of Star Trek. And I hope that there's room for him, because obviously we lost Terry Metalis to another franchise.
Yes, for a while at least.
Yes. Actually, 2 other franchises, because he's doing an Enemy Mine
he's busy.
Reboot. So
I mean, that's so great for him. And if you haven't seen Lower Decks because you don't have Paramount Plus, which makes me wonder why you're listening to our podcast. But anyway, season 1 is now available for free on YouTube in the USA.
I like it when they do these promotions. They should put it all. They've done that in the past where they put stuff on Pluto, but I checked and they didn't do that for this at this time, at least. I think the first season of all the new Star Trek shows should be on Pluto at this point.
Yeah, I agree.
First season of Discovery was 7 years ago.
Oh my God, it was. That is crazy.
One last thing before we start Prodigy chat is another famous celebrity talking about Star Trek. So Rosario Dawson has been talking about how she wants to be in Star Trek. She's a huge Trekkie.
For years, she's been talking about it.
Yeah. And specifics. Like, I remember a couple years ago, she's like, okay, I want to be in Picard or on Discovery. I want to play Q. Like, I mean, she has, needs and wants and desires.
She speaks Klingon too, doesn't she? I think she does.
A little bit, yeah. And and she's even said, like, I'll be a background character, I'll be anything. But then she revealed at a convention event that she was recently asked to be in Star Trek, but she had to turn it down because of the Ahsoka show. So she said she was offered a role to play a changeling in Star Trek. And this was a few years ago. You'd think it would be for the 3rd season of Picard, but it wasn't. I've checked. But it could have been for the 2nd season of Picard or for Discovery or for Strange New Worlds. It would have been the 4th season of Discovery, which did have a minor changeling character. So it's unclear what, it's possible the role never happened because she couldn't do it.
Or that changeling would have had a bigger role or something. We don't know.
Yeah. But, so hopefully Rosario Dawson, because, Paul Giamatti recently got his wish to be in Star Trek.
Yes.
So it could take years, and hopefully she'll still wait. What's funny is she did this convention event. She's been in Star Wars. She has her own Star Wars show. She walks out on stage, flashes the Vulcan salute, and says, "Live long and prosper."
There you go.
That shows how much of a nerd. This wasn't a Star Trek convention. She's obviously more into Star Trek than Star Wars. She is into Star Wars, but she really wants to be in Star Trek.
Yeah, and she should be.
So it's time for us to do some Prodigy. So this is this is going to be different for us. We kind of debated how to do this, right? Because there's 20 episodes. We couldn't do 20 episodes of this podcast, one for each, but we couldn't do it all. Like I've seen some, sites out there, they've reviewed the season as a single review. And that's all they're going to do. And, and I'm like, just because Netflix dropped 20 episodes doesn't mean we're just going to talk about that drop and then move on.
Right.
So what we've been doing on the site and what we're going to do for this podcast is we're going to spread it out over July, the 20 episodes over the month of July.
So 5 a week, basically.
Right. Which is kind of how I talked to Aaron a little bit about this. That makes sense because they kind of structured it that way because the first season was kind of 5 episode arcs as well.
Yeah.
From my discussions with Aaron and the brothers, season 2 isn't as clear a distinction.
Yeah.
But still there is a kind of break for each 5. So today we're going to talk about the first 5 episodes.
And we'll see how it goes. This is a new experiment.
Yeah. So hopefully you guys are, if you're binging, I know some people just watch the whole thing in a day.
I get it. I was dying to keep going. I've only watched the first 5 and I was so yearning to keep going. I'm enjoying it so much. This show is really something special. So let's talk about these 5 episodes. First of all, what did you think?
I forgot how much, I don't know how I could forget. I forgot how much I liked this show. And I don't know if it's better or I just forgot, but it's great. The first 5 episodes are great. From the start, it's just such a strong show. It's so well crafted. The thing that you and I always talk about is making sure that these seasons are crafted together where they know where they're going. And, and you can see this in little ways and big ways, like the gag of him not knowing what temporal mechanics 101 is. And people keep on asking about it. Eventually, by episode 4, he actually finally reads it, and it's the name of the episode. But there's more profound ways where you can see this structure. And this is a much more serialized season. In a way, if this thing weren't bingeable, it might be more frustrating.
Yeah.
Especially early on in the season, they split us into 3 separate storylines, but then each episode, rightfully, I feel, because they've only got 22 minutes, would only service 2 of them with maybe a little dip into the third, because you just can't do 3. Storylines.
No, not in like a 20-something minute episode.
Yeah.
These are short episodes. And I just feel like they have the pace just right. They have the level of story development just right. Character development just right. They're experts at balancing. They're planting seeds for things that are going to happen, but they're still giving us in the moment moments. Great lines, great exchanges, emotional beats. And the visuals and the music are just breathtaking, I find.
Oh, yeah. Just the Voyager A, which is a new character, is beautiful.
It's gorgeous.
Inside and out. I even like the Infinity. It's kind of ugly on purpose.
Yeah.
There's all these wonderful space shots and the wormhole. I feel like the show, and it makes sense, the show is more mature and more confident. And that's reflected in how the humor is handled on the show. It's less physical humor. I think, a lot of this has to do with we'll talk more about him later, but, you brought in the Doctor character, and that is a different kind of humor than they've dealt with before.
But we still get like Murph snot,
I was trying to have we seen Murph leak before? That was,
I felt like that was like his nose dripping or something. That's what I thought.
But what is coming? Is Murph is a
liquid,
substance,
yeah.
Is what leaks out of Murph?
And does he need it back?
You're right. Exactly. That's what I was thinking. Can he reabsorb his leaking? Anyway, these are big, important questions, obviously.
When we have Aaron on, we'll ask him about Murph leaking.
Exactly. There's less action, it feels like, and some of the action hasn't been that great, which we can get into in the specific episode discussions. And there's been a lot of exposition because this is a more complicated season. They're dealing with these big sci-fi issues, and they're not shying away from them. I
love the way they're doing the exposition. Even whether it's catching us up on the story or giving kids who are watching a crash course in Turbolev's temporal mechanics, whatever it is, time travel, they're doing it beautifully, I feel.
Oh, yeah. They know their audience.
Even Gwyn just outlining to Dal what her mission is, she does it in the way a teenager is like, oh, and I have to do this and this and this and this, and I don't even know how to do that. It just seemed very natural, and yet was a great way for unfamiliar audience to find out what the hell's going on.
Let's talk a little bit about the first episode then. I feel like, or the first two episodes, which is part 1 and part 2. I feel like you didn't even need a previously on. They were really smart in the way that episode was structured, that I feel like it did a really good job at different moments, and they didn't cram this all into the first 3 minutes, of reminding you of the key elements of the finale and the implications of that.
Yeah, I called it easing in. They eased into making sure that you knew what had happened and where everybody is now.
Right. Everyone's in a new place physically. There was a time gap, 6 months, who knows? But there's definitely a gap in time. What I really liked about it is every character not only had their new place, so Dal is in the command track and Murph is going to be in security, and they all fit really well. Rock, obviously, but each one fits into Starfleet differently. And the extremes are Rock and Dal. And I think there's kind of a coming conflict, or there's an ongoing conflict between the two of them, because Rock is like, I love this. I love the rules. I don't want to break any rules. And Dal's like, I can't stand this. I think it's possible that Dal doesn't make it.
Oh, into the academy?
Yeah, I think that, that it may be that he's, or maybe that's a lesson for him to learn later.
I think it's a lesson for him to learn. And I have to say that even though everyone blamed him for what happened with the ship, it actually wasn't, it was because of him, but it wasn't directly his fault.
Are you talking about the Infinity?
Yes.
I don't know.
Because the new character, Majel, gave Jankum the neck pinch. He fell forward. His head hit the thing. So that wasn't something Dal did.
That's true. But his idea of moving the ship, moving this... Well, first of all, it all started when Majel overheard them talking about the secret mission.
And saying Shuttle Bay 3.
And so for some reason she decides I need to go to Shuttle Bay 3 with my Nova Squadron wannabes to find out what's going on. And anyone else but Dal would have probably said, we need to tell Janeway, because they're now in the circle of trust. Right. But they immediately decide to go it alone. But that's the thing. Like, Dal does not get the chain of command. He's and I don't think he ever will, perhaps.
He's also been sort of shooed away from her and told, like, don't be on the bridge, and she's really busy. Like, the other two guys were like, she's busy. She doesn't have time to talk to you.
That's true. But his plan of, like, we'll just move it from one shuttle bay to the other one and no one will notice. I mean, that
That was a bad plan.
Very bad plan. And then, so he put them in the situation where her Vulcan nerve pinch set them off on that course. I do feel, and we're jumping episodes, which, but that's because this is an arc, is that when they came back in episode 4 and then into episode 5, Janeway is just like, I was agreeing with Gnome, like, these kids are reckless, they're endangering the timeline, and she's like, shit happens.
She's seen a lot of stuff. I always think, like, Voyager was one of the wackier shows, so she's seen her fair share. He came to her already and was like, felt terrible and knew he'd screwed up, and they had other things to deal with. I
mean, she did demote Tom Paris. She did put people in the brig. I feel like these kids are loose cannons, and it's so obvious, and they got put on like probation, not even super double secret probation, just regular probation. They can still walk around the ship and do hijinks, which they immediately do.
Of course they do.
Now, of course, the show can only be the show if the kids are allowed to run around the ship and do hijinks.
Right.
But it needs to be believable that Admiral Janeway would allow them to have this freedom. And I felt like she was a little too, because she kind of came off as a hard ass in season 1, and she is, and she's a little too, because hologram Janeway's gone now, and it's almost like they're giving her some of the touchy-feely hologram Janeway characteristics now that hologram Janeway is gone, essentially.
But I do feel like that's been kind of built in. Like in season 1, she didn't know what they were up to, and she was one of the first ones to be like, maybe this isn't quite the story we think it is. Like, maybe they aren't these criminals, and maybe there's more that we need to know. And so she has look, when she had Voyager back in the day, she had Neelix and Cass on there. She had Seven, who got away with all kinds of crazy stuff. She had, Tom, and on these Maquis, like, she is used to dealing with these people who come from different backgrounds and don't know Starfleet. And she has always tried to understand them. And
I guess
not judge them based on an objective Starfleet stand. Like when Ro shows up on the Enterprise in TNG and everybody's like, she's not doing stuff the way she's supposed to do. But Janeway gets it, and she's dealt with it before. So to me, it kind of fits in with her character.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like there's only been a couple things where I'm like, that makes zero sense. The one that almost broke me was in episode 4 when they're like, okay, the Infinity's not going anywhere. Let's turn it into a time machine because we can't fly it. They made a very big point about it. They can't fly it. And then somehow they moved it across the planet into this hole, and they show it being winched down on these cables. It's like, what?
Yeah.
Like you're building scaffolding on this planet when they made it clear that the Val Nakot are searching for them. The older diviner, I get my timelines mixed up, but yeah, the evil diviner is looking for them. The robots are and the robots only show up at the last. Like, how did they move the ship? I just feel like the show is so good at that stuff. Like one line of dialogue, they could have done it where like they used the transporter to move it or just something. It just made zero sense. But I know why they had to get it into the hole, and so they just did it.
Just did it. Well, like my only so if I can have a complaint, my complaint would be that the Solum elders or whatever should be able to tell from Essensia's voice that she's evil, because she's just, everything she says just sounds like, oh, that's the bad guy. And I love Jamila Jamil. So I think that she's great, but I just think that she should be a little less mustache twirly in her tone, because it's like, wow, you'd hear it anything, you'd be like, oh, there's your bad guy.
Yeah, there's a famous skit from Mitchell and Webb, and one of them, they're Nazis, and they're and one of them says, "Have you ever looked at our caps? Are we the bad guys?" Because they've got skulls on them.
Yeah.
But here's my counterpoint to that. I mean, yes, she is absolutely one-dimensional at best. However, I feel like they're doing something with this storyline, which the way she talks and the stuff she talks about how Gwyn is basically a fake Valnicott, and they talk about outsiders. I feel like there's a allegory here about fear of the unknown, preying on people's fears, questioning what's real and what's not real, essentially fake news. And so, and the elders wear these masks that you can't, like, it looks like have blinders on.
They literally can't see anything.
Right. So they are literally blinded by the fear of the unknown, and she is playing them like a fiddle and saying, "You're afraid of the unknown. Well, this woman is a faker and outsiders but what I love, in fact, is how we're meeting this new character, even though he's not a new character, Ilthurian, who's the diviner, but it's young astronomer guy, and he's super cash.
He is delightful. I mean, I want to go back to Essentia for 1 second, because I think what is going to happen is that the young Essentia, who's given all these looks of like, I'm scared, this she's got looks on her face whenever we see the young version of her. So I think there's a conflict brewing or something coming with her not agreeing with her different self.
Her older self, right.
Her older self. So now we have the diviner's younger self, and he's just giggling and laughing, and he's so delighted that all this is happening. And I thought it was wonderful work by John Noble voicing him, and it just put a big smile on my face while I was watching. Like, I love this guy.
I mean, in one episode, he voices, because there's a brief diviner spotting where he's like, search for them, or, the typical diviner stuff. But then the rest of it, he's, in the way he immediately loves his daughter and is like, I'm going to sit by your side, even though you're fading out of reality. And the way the kids react to him, and he's like cool with that. And like, he gets it. He's like,
he backs up so that they can get to her. Like, he recognizes that because they've been like, the diviner. And so he steps away, which is what makes them come forward.
So, I mean, I love how we're getting to understand Valnicott society more. They have this ancient ritual. I mean, which, how many times have we seen on Star Trek an ancient ritual? I wasn't a huge fan of the fight scene. I'm sure you weren't either.
No, I wasn't. But it wasn't that long. It didn't take too long.
No, but the villain dialoguing during the fight was just so, oh my God. But I loved how, like, Gwyn's solution is she's going to use the heirlooms to climb out, and then she gets Marty McFly because Dahl screwed up the timeline. Right,
but it would have worked. She would have been the one to climb out.
Yeah, even though that's now kind of over, I guess. We'll probably check in on evil future Essentia again.
Yeah, I don't think we're done with that.
I mean, the timelines are confusing here. That the future Solum is where the protostar was.
The protostar goes back into the past, which is our present.
But it goes even further in the past than 2385. It has to go way in the past and get buried.
Right.
So there are, is super complicated. So when Dal shows up and meets Chakotay in episode 3, that's future Solum. That's war-torn, post-Civil War Solum. Every once in a while, they stop to make sure the audience is catching up and they do a little thing where they show the star date, and I feel like they shouldn't start. I love star dates and stuff, but they should show the year. They should say 2385 and then 50. Every once in a while, I guess they do say 52 years in the future, but it should be super clear. They could be even clearer.
It is clear. It's just as soon as you're talking about, like when I'm talking about it, I'll suddenly jumble it up like I just did.
Yeah.
But I understand it fully when I'm watching the story, and it all makes sense. And it doesn't give me a headache.
Speaking of this kind of visual exposition, what did you think of Temporal Mechanics 101, where it was a visual storybook from Dr. Aaron McDonald, played by Dr. Aaron
McDonald. I thought it was super cute. I like the way they did it. I like the visuals. And the only thing I didn't like was at the end where she's like, don't take risks. It might give you a headache. And I'm like, no, she should have said, don't take risks because you could mess up history for everybody else. I only thought her conclusion was lacking gravity. But other than that, I enjoyed it and I thought it was good.
It was fun. I mean, there were some Easter eggs in there. I mean, one could say it was a little too, it depends on what, is 101 a college course? Because it was not very college coursey.
It felt like it was for a kid. Yeah.
Yeah. But otherwise, I thought it was a lot of fun. And, but the biggest point was sometimes history needs a nudge or something, she said, to make sure it still happens, because, and this, they brought the receipts, so they're saying essentially Dow and those guys are kind of like Picard in First Contact, where they're part of history.
Yes.
Or the Bell Riots and DS9, which both of which were called out specifically, a causal loop.
And it's what we were talking about when we had Aaron on the show, on this podcast. We were talking about that too, because I'd also just finished a Voyager episode where Janeway or somebody says, like, sometimes the fact happens before the cause. And you're like, what? But sometimes it does with time travel. So that's what they're leaning on.
However, maybe not, because they thought they were part of the solution, but then they ended up by dropping that, this, I like how the butterfly effect is simply they dropped a phaser rifle.
Yep.
And then Chakotay picked it up. He got on the ship and went who knows where. And so maybe it wasn't a causal loop. Were they wrong?
Well, I feel like we'll find out.
Right. Is it a causal loop within a causal loop?
Yeah, let's see how it all plays out. That's how we're going to find out.
So let's back out a little bit. So the season started with there was a mission and a secret mission, and the mission was to observe the wormhole, which they created by blowing up the protostar. But then Janeway was going to go through the wormhole with her crew until Jellicoe said no, but they couldn't go through until Chakotay had launched the protostar to make sure they didn't mess up time.
Right.
Now the mission after these 5 episodes has changed. I'm not sure. I mean, Janeway's mission, I guess, is to go home now, but the kids are still on that mission to save Chakotay.
Because they feel that they owe him a lot, because it's because of him that they escaped and that they got to be who they are now. And now they feel guilty too.
I mean, first, I'm really glad that we finally got the kids, or some of them, meeting Chakotay. They're waiting for Janeway and Chakotay reunion, probably well into the second half of the season. That's going to be the big one. We got another flashback of them together, but the actual Janeway finally gets Chakotay. I mean, maybe episode 40, episode 20 of season 2. How long do you think they're going to wait for that?
I don't think they're going to wait till the end. I
think they're going to wait pretty close to the end. I think definitely not in the first 10.
I think it'll be before. It won't be it'll be before the last 5.
I'm predicting episode 17.
I'll take 14.
Okay. But we did. Yeah, I thought that was really fun because Chakotay, in the flashback, there's something still a little rigid, and there's like he was humanized with the kids, and we got the bird puns were fantastic.
The bird puns were so good. He's like, bird pun's not your thing, huh? Got it. Didn't mean to ruffle your feathers. And he just keeps going. He can't stop.
Yeah, Jacobs, I mean, he's been a great source of humor this season. You knew that the whole stiff Jankum, the combed over Jankum wasn't going to last.
He's still trying.
But yeah, I mean, hopefully he has an arc. But anyway, so I'm really glad that we got some actual Chakotay. In these 5 episodes, they are, even though in episode 4, Murph was talking to something that looked just like Future Guy, which seemed a little too on the nose. It's obviously not going to be Future Guy. But they're trying, I think now, someone's sending them these messages.
Well, they said it was Chakotay.
Because, it started as the orb, but you think it's all the same thing. There's the shadowy figure talking to Murph, the orb at the beginning, the pulsating nebula. It's all one entity. The spiral is tied to Chakotay, obviously, because of the medicine bundle.
Yes, which we saw. It was in Cathexis, which I also recently rewatched on Voyager. So that's his thing.
I think the bundle showed up every once in a while, but
yeah, but it's like a beacon. Well, that episode in particular, his consciousness was lost, and B'Elanna put it up to help guide him home. So, well, so there's two things going on, right? Like there's this voice that's been giving them instructions, but then there's also like the magic, as I think Jankum said something about like the magical mystery entity or whatever that got the ship going. And
well, I assume that's the same thing.
But how did the ship just suddenly was like, okay, I work now. That was weird. That couldn't have been Chakotay. If you could send
how could, that's the thing. Like Chakotay must, whoever it is, Chakotay has some kind of way to manipulate time, send messages. Some things are small, like send a message to the computer. Then suddenly the ship gets fixed. So
that was the one that was like, how did the ship get
So you think
fixed?
It's two different entities? One is sending messages. What? Yeah.
I don't know how the ship got fixed. That one I have no explanation for.
Because it needed to. Because, but, that's, I mean, this is the thing, like, if this were a regular season, one episode a week, we'd be doing theory articles. Is it Chakotay? Is it something else? Because you could think of 20 different possibilities from Star Trek. Is it one of them? Is it like old Dal? I mean, that's kind of the cliche that one of them is sending messages to their younger self, as
right.
But I like the fact that it is a mystery. But I want to go back to what's new this season. What do you think for these first 5 episodes of the character of Majel?
I like her. What I like about her is that she was all set to just be a jerk about them, and then immediately started helping, recognized like I've got skills that I should just be using, and help them a lot. She was super helpful.
She's reluctantly helping. I feel like she's been a little bit too much of a kind of stereotypical Vulcan nag, calling people illogical and stuff. They didn't really thaw her out that much until the 5th episode when we see this budding relationship with Zero. I mean, Zero's arc is definitely for this season, right when we meet them, I wish I had a heart, right?
Yes.
It's pure Tin Man,
yep.
Right? And we definitely, they got super flustered when Majal's like, you're the least illogical of the bunch, you know? There's like,
you too. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's definitely going somewhere, but hopefully, the kind of nagging Vulcan, there's even this thing where, Dal says you're worse than Gwyn because now that he loves Gwyn used to be kind of that way. They're like but Rock is already kind of there saying you should follow the rules. Like we don't need another person telling Dal stop breaking the rules.
Well, but Rock wasn't on the mission.
I know, but you know what I mean? Like it's kind of still a similar role. I don't know what to make of Majel yet, I guess.
Oh, I like her. I like her because she does know Starfleet rules and regulations and procedures. So she has that to contribute. And she's practical. When you need a neck pinch, and I don't mean the Jankum one, but the other one, she's like, oh, we got it. She covers her ears. She does that. She's, I like her. I think she'll be an interesting addition. I mean, I almost don't love how Rock is so by the book, like so worried about it, but I love my Rock. So.
Rock is, in theory, still the youngest. We still don't know how long she was alone in that one episode.
I know. I think about that a lot, just in every scene that she's in. I just look at her and I think about that.
But, just being surrounded by structure and authority figures is her nirvana. And,
well, it's you know what? It's her comfort. I think it's comfort and security.
Dal is putting her whole world at risk. So I get it. I like that conflict. And I love her new happy place, Cetacean Ops.
I know. It's so good. With Jillian the whale.
Right. I mean, these guys love Star Trek so much.
I know. Right? They just put in these small things, and I love it. And jokes that harken back to their own show. Like, I love when Dal picks up Zero and uses them as a flashlight. And Zero's like, not this again.
They are very convenient. I mean, they do glow. I mean, it's what are you going to do?
They
right?
are very convenient. They can do a lot of things.
It is interesting how they have done a little bit of that mind reading, which I still think is creepy, right?
Mm-hmm.
They should stop doing that.
Yeah, you're supposed to think it's creepy.
They've been called out on that. They can't seem to help themselves still.
Yeah, well, it would be hard. Imagine if you could.
Fair enough. Yeah, there have been some great Easter eggs in this. We were talking about Majel. She referenced how she figured out how to build the time machine. It was based on Lieutenant Worf. She mentioned Lieutenant Worf.
She watched Parallels.
She watched Parallels, exactly.
It's a great episode. I don't blame her.
So, and there's been more of that. Janeway, her ready room had lots of little obvious and less obvious bits, right? Yep. There was her Queen Arachnia hairpin and her old phaser. But there was something, and I didn't even know. I got a little help from someone who worked on the show. There's a compact mirror there, and it's from a short story. So it's beta canon, and it's a short story when Janeway and Chakotay go on a date on the holodeck. So it's just an incredibly deep cut, but could be an indication because it's kind of this great JC / fiction, even though it's kind of official. I don't know. I mean, that's the big question of, when they do in episode 17, finally meet, is it a romantic meeting or not? What did you think of, because there's the flashback in episode 5, which picked up on the flashback from season 1. Mm-hmm. It's basically shows us the rest of that scene. Did you get any romantic? What did you think? It seemed even more like that was a nice, the season 1, but they seemed even closer here.
Yes, I would agree. There's a vibe.
Yeah, there's definitely a vibe. I mean, it doesn't have to be, but it could be for sure.
Right. Which is honestly what was going on most Voyager episodes.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of touches and intimate moments and things, but then she just keeps drawing the line. So who knows? Maybe she stopped drawing the line when they weren't captain or first officer.
How do you think about how they're handling, now that we're on the romance thing, there's still a thing with Dal and Gwyn.
Yeah, I loved their conversation in the first episode where they're catching up. Like, he calls her because he feels bad, and she is explaining her thing, and they're both being really nice to each other, and they have an easy way of speaking to each other and an easy connection.
Yeah, when he thinks that he lost her, the heartbreak is he's obviously super in love with her. Mm-hmm. It's not clear that feels the same, though, is my question.
Well, she talks about his charm, and she indicates how well she knows him. So, I don't know, it felt pretty mutual to me.
Perhaps. I don't know if it's important for the show. It's something that came out of season 1, and they're bringing it back. So I feel like that's going somewhere this season.
Yeah, there's one, what else I think might be going somewhere is back on Solum. Essentia says something to the elders about, there are enemies among us. And I wonder if she's going to go after the young diviner before he's the diviner. That he's going to be someone she goes after. It's going to be, I feel like things there are interesting and have more places to go.
She also talked about militarizing. Mm-hmm. Do they somehow have the ability, maybe they've got some secret weapons that they can attack the Federation, and be a threat. Speaking of the Federation, we're in the Federation from moment 1, and they are not shying away from having elements touch on other shows. In little ways, the Doctor mentions the Cerritos.
And the Romulan evacuation.
Yeah, so, because we're right in there. We're not long before the Children of Mars short treks.
Yeah. With
the attack on Mars. And the Voyager launches from that same facility, if you look closely. So I'm wondering if by the end of this season, we're going to get even closer to some of those Picard elements.
Right. I think we might. He already got a shout out.
Yeah. When I talk to the Hagemans, they're like, we're part of we want to sit at the adults table is how they put it.
And we know from other people we've spoken to that they all have meetings and they all send stuff around and make sure that people aren't overlapping or changing history that, that one person chose to do with a character, and they're careful about it and they're in contact. And they were when they were creating all this stuff.
So what do you think about Picardo and the Doctor? What do you think he brings to the table?
I mean, I loved the scene where he was in the turbo lift with them and sending them all off on their assignments. I'm not sure how much, like, other than that, like being their sort of guardian, I'm not sure what else, what void he's filling.
Well, he's filling the void left by hologram Janeway, supposedly, as their sort of minder.
Well, that's
which
what I said.
We saw more of in episode 5 when they're all trying to escape him.
Right.
I mean, I've enjoyed. It's interesting. Like, he's now become the doctor of the ship. He makes sure that Gwyn is taken care of because she's out of phase. I loved his. They did a "I'm a doctor, not a butler" when he was introduced, which was fantastic. But then in episode 4, he goes, "I'm a doctor, not an exorcist," and that just seemed forced. But for the most part, I'm loving it.
I liked his moment with Zero. I thought that was really good, and I liked where he's talking about like corporeal and love and all that stuff. And I love that he's still obsessed with his novel that he's writing.
Yeah,
and that's how Zero gets him to distracts him.
So no, I think it's a good addition. Though one thing that it has done is we're not getting a lot of Jason Alexander and Daveed Diggs anymore. He's kind of taking up the oxygen of the crew, as it were, of Janeway's bridge crew. I'm such a huge Jason Alexander fan. It's weird. Like, even in the first episode, it's like, I was like, is that still him?
Yeah, his voice seemed a little different or something. And I love Daveed Diggs too.
Yeah, these characters are not interesting anymore.
I think they will be. Like, because Aaron mentioned to us about having the 2 doctors on the one ship is going to get interesting.
Okay, well, hopefully. They're kind of fading into the background.
I'm hoping they start having more interaction with the kids instead of just shooing them away.
Right. I mean, there's only so many characters you could service on a show like this.
I think we'll get more of them. I think we'll see, like, the Tellarite stuff, and I think we'll see Doctor stuff, and I think there's more to come.
But you could tell, so when Janeway is saying goodbye to Chakotay when she has to collapse the wormhole, it's the Doctor that comes to her, and they have a moment, and that's a wonderful moment.
Yes.
In season 1, that would have been with Gnome or Tysus. But now that they, I feel like the writers are like, well, we've got Robert Picard, we've got the Doctor. And they'll just always lean into using him.
Also, they have a longer relationship. I mean, it makes natural sense.
It makes natural sense. But I'm just saying, bringing him in basically demoted them as characters.
Yeah, well, so far, for sure, yes.
Even though both actors are fantastic.
Yeah, all the actors are fantastic. There's so many great people on this show. It's amazing.
Yeah, there's not a bad one in the bunch, for sure. And some of them are doing new things this season, like we mentioned with John Noble. I mean, not that it was obvious that he has range, but he's actually able to use it here.
I love this side of him. All right, is there anything else we need to get to before I run away and put on my TV and watch the next 5?
Well, how are you watching them? I watched the first 2 as a single episode, even though I felt like they worked as separate episodes.
Yeah, I would agree. It didn't necessarily feel like a part 1 cliffhanger kind of ending.
And I watched the next 2, I think, together as well, thinking, oh, maybe they're doing it that way. And I did feel like the next 2 were almost a part 1 and 2, but then I waited a day. The idea of watching 3 or more at a time, I just can't do that. Maybe,
I watched the first 2 when we were talking about doing 2 a week. And then as soon as we decided 5, I was like, I'm running back to the TV and watched the next 3, and then I was like, oh damn, I can't watch the next one. So I have left to my own devices, I think I would have watched all of them by now.
Yeah, but there's certainly people out there who've watched all 20.
I'd already be on a second pass. I think. And you know what's I will say this, we usually watch screeners because we get things ahead of time so that we can do these reviews and plan for interviews and stuff like that. But now I feel great because I'm actually just watching it all on Netflix because it's there and giving them the views at the same time, which makes me very happy.
I mean, we did get screeners, but it was like
4 days before or something like that. Yeah. Just enough time. So I watched the first 2 first screeners, but now I'm just watching them on Netflix, which is nice because I want it to get views and I want it to do well.
I think I'm going to try to slowly but surely. I want to savor it. That's the thing. You plow through 20 and it's over, Well,
I take a few minutes after each one, actually. I stop for a minute and I take a minute and I think about it. And sometimes even while I'm doing my first watch, I've occasionally rewound to see something again.
With the problem with the binge watch, even though it can be satisfying, just eating a bag of chips, is they stop being episodes. You can't even was that episode 2 or 3, or it's all just a blob.
Right. I'm giving it enough breaks. And when I take and then I don't do any notes on my first pass, but when I do notes later, I'm sort of marking beginning and end of it. I do a little summary for myself so that I can really keep the episode straight.
Right.
Anyway, it's an interesting experiment across the board. But let's move on to our bits of the week.
Mine is a little Star Trek adjacent. I think certainly for myself, and I think a lot of fans, the first time you ever heard of the concept of a Dyson Sphere was in Star Trek when they showed one in the episode Relics with Scotty.
Mm-hmm.
So you may have seen in the news recently, scientists discover possible Dyson Spheres in the news in space, which would be kind of a big deal that, they've spotted Dyson Spheres out there in space, because not only that would be alien civilizations, but it'd be super advanced alien civilizations.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a great video with Neil deGrasse Tyson, huge Star Trek fan himself, where he kind of breaks down this report. He explains in the scientific community, if you want to get noticed, you mention aliens. What these scientists discovered was simply here's some candidate star systems that these stars are putting off too much infrared light than they should be. Yes, that could be proof that somehow a civilization is capturing the other energy of those stars, or it could just be space gas, or something like that,
Huh.
So it's a great, I just love Neil deGrasse Tyson, and the title is "Did Scientists Discover Alien Megastructures?" ?
Oh, it's a good title.
The answer is probably not.
Yeah. But who knows? Maybe? Yeah.
Maybe?
Possibly. Well, mine is a bit of a plug for myself, but I was a guest on a podcast that's a fun one. The podcast is called Deep Space Love, and it's hosted by a married couple, and they talk about love and relationships with Star Trek episodes and characters. They do some other sci-fi too, but I joined them to talk about the Deep Space Nine episode Rejoined, which, is so famous because they're like, ooh, the lesbian kiss episode, and that's what it's famous for. But when you really sit down and watch it, it's also a fantastic episode of Deep Space Nine. Great writing, great directing, stellar acting, and lots to talk about in terms of their relationship and love. So we had a lot of fun talking about it, and they have lots of other great episodes. So we'll put in a link to that.
I can't wait to listen.
We had fun. I had fun rewatching it. I was like, damn, this one is good. It's directed by Avery Brooks, and he did an incredible job.
Yeah, he directed a handful of really strong episodes, actually.
Yeah, this one was really beautifully directed. I can't wait till the Delta Flyers cover it, because I'm sure Terry Farrell will have a lot to say about it. She's already done a lot of interviews about it over the years anyway. So that's it for the week. We will be back next week with 5 more episodes of Star Trek Prodigy and all the latest news.
Bye.